Welcome back to the Spiritable podcast. We are here with Spencer Cowley, and today we're having a real serious discussion about domestic violence, domestic abuse, and what that looks like in relationships and how to heal from it. Spencer has his story, if you want to.
Yeah, so I just go over my background, being a witness to my parents experiencing some domestic abuse, and then we talked a little bit more about how kids are raised. I can't speak.
No, you're great. You're great.
Yeah, we're going to also talk about the ways communities can be involved in getting the message out and not keeping people in sort of isolated silence about it, how to speak out about it. And we also talk about ways that the perpetrator, the victim, and the witness can all seek help and find healing. Check it out.
Hi, I'm Luke.
I'm Richard.
And this is the Spiritable podcast.
We're having conversations about big spiritual, moral, and social issues in hopefully a more grounded way.
We talk a lot from the religious philosophy of this guy, Emanuel Swedenborg, and our own twist on Christianity. Check out episode 9 for more on that.
But of course, we don't have all the answers, so we like to bring on guests with their own philosophies.
Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, atheist, etc.
To help get new perspectives and to challenge each other's beliefs.
Everyone has some relationship with spirituality, but for some dumb reason it can be hard to talk about.
And everyone's experience with life is going to be a little different, and that's what makes it so interesting.
So, thanks for joining us on Spiritable. So today we have on Spencer Cowley joining us to talk about domestic violence. Spencer and me and Richard go way back to, what was that, like 2014 or something like that?
2013, I think.
I guess Spencer and I go even further back.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
We grew up in the same
true.
little... We went to school together.
What's your first memory of Spencer?
Probably Spencer in kindergarten.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was a piece of crap.
I was probably like third grade when you were in kindergarten, somewhere around there.
Yep.
I think, so in our school, we would have worship every morning. It's a little church school. And they had a program where the 7th grade would come and give worship to the 3rd and 4th grade. And the 3rd and 4th grade would go and give a little worship service to the kindergarten.
That's
I think
adorable.
I remember, it was so cute.
That's super cute.
And I think I remember giving worship to you while you were in kindergarten.
Yeah, you must have. Yeah.
So yeah, that's my first memory of Spencer.
Nice. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Spencer was a way nicer kid than you were.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's pretty true.
Oh, yeah.
That's funny. Spencer.
Competition.
Yeah. What? not Steve competition.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I was a little nightmare.
Spencer, what's your first? So we were Spencer's RAs, resident assistants, when he was in high school. So we kind of like had to enforce the rules a little bit. We were also like not that much older than he was, so it was kind of a weird respect line. So what was your first impression of us as RAs? Brutal honesty time.
Well, you know, I had my RAs that I really liked and my RAs that I didn't like as much. So in terms of you guys, I liked you both a lot.
Nice.
Luke, we always thought of you as sort of like the white knight, you know, the guy who was like, he wanted to be your friend, but the rules came first, regardless.
I think that is the role I filled.
But yeah.
So, Spencer, tell us about like where you are now. You just graduated college, right?
Yeah, so I just graduated with my bachelor's, just one more year, and then I'll have my master's, luckily. But yeah, so I'm kind of just on the edge right now between, you know, being a child and being an adult. Because even though I'm 22 now and realistically I'm an adult, I'm still in college and I don't feel like it. Yeah.
I just turned 25 and I still feel like mentally like I'm just like 17. Like I've been 17 ever since I turned 17. I feel like that's the thing I fit. But also like, I don't know, I also feel like 45 at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's a strange mix. Mid-20s are a weird time.
Yeah.
It's been a weird transition. And now you're married and like super adult. You're about to go to South Africa.
Yeah. I'm
You're
leaving
like
in like a week.
super hard. Don't go. This might be our last episode. No, do we have one more with Richard?
Yeah, we're doing one next week with Richard.
Okay, that's good. All right. So, you guys know, like on this podcast, we want it to be a place to be able to talk about anything and to meet people realistically where they are and where they've come from. And not only to have interfaith discussions, but be able to talk about pretty heavy material. Like just a couple weeks ago, I'm not sure when this is coming out, but we talked about suicide, and that was a really tough subject. And another one that we want to touch on is domestic violence and domestic abuse, because it's something that is really prevalent, you know, not only today, but has been for a long time, and maybe now is being discussed more than it has, and stuff is coming to the light that it should, which is great. And so I feel like religiously and faith-wise, we want to contribute to that as well, and be able to hold that and realize that even, in the conversations that we have here and in religions and faiths, people struggle with that sort of thing as well. Like there is still domestic abuse wherever you go. And it's just really good to meet people where they are and put that out there. So Spencer has a story and has a history with domestic violence. So I'd love to kind of open the floor to you to hear your story, because I've never heard the thing in totality. So I think it'd be really useful.
So just like general overview of sort of my story here is that when I was very young, my parents, who are long divorced now, there was domestic abuse between them, one-sided from my father to my mother. And they probably got divorced when I was like, I don't know, 5 or 6. I can't remember exactly. Obviously, that time in my life is pretty hazy because I was, one, really young, and two, repressed a lot of it probably. Yeah. So, but from what I do remember, my father was abusive towards my mother, both emotionally and physically. And I was witness to a lot of it and sort of in between a lot of it. And I have a younger sister who's a few years younger than me now. She's 18. And she was obviously much younger at the time too. And I don't know how much of it she remembers. I know she remembers a very, very small amount, but because I remember not even that much, I doubt she remembers very much.
Right.
But so my mom ended up being sort of that strong single mother character in my life after they split up, and it's always amazing seeing what she's accomplished now after the way she started in my life, because she had me when she was 22 years old, and my father wasn't even fully around when I was born. My name is actually Cowley legally, which is my mother's maiden name, because my dad wasn't there to sign my birth certificate. So it says father not stated, which is kind of funny in a sad way too.
Yeah.
And so one of the big things I do want to touch on is that my father was mentally ill, which is the other thing. I won't go into details about anything like that, but what we were talking about just before this is getting the three sides of domestic abuse, which is the perpetrator, the victim, and the witness. And while I'm the witness, my father, who was the perpetrator, I struggled for a long time in terms of, can I forgive him for the things that he did, that kind of stuff. I do want to say, though, that now, at this point in my life, I'm still in contact with him. We talk occasionally. I've seen him actually twice this summer, believe it or not. And we have a pretty good relationship now. And he's far, far different from the person he was then. He's really gone through a sort of metamorphosis because he's sort of turned his life around, gotten his medication right, things like that. And so while he had that mental illness, and that doesn't necessarily forgive him for the things he did, I kind of came to the point where I knew that I needed to forgive him up to a point, because I wanted him to still be at least existent in my life versus not.
So you seem like in part you want to forgive him for him and for yourself to be able to move past.
Yeah, and I just figured while he did the things he did, we did still have like a good relationship in a lot of ways, and he was dealt a pretty bad hand too. And this is not at all to say that it's unforgivable or it's completely forgivable. But it's something that you just have to look at, by case. Right. Like he was abused growing up, I know, by one of his parents. And so that's a big topic here, is that abuse breeds abuse, violence breeds violence. Yeah. And so it's a really, really tough thing. And if somebody out there is listening and, they've experienced these kinds of things and they haven't wanted to forgive the perpetrator, totally understand that. Just in my case, it's one of those things where I knew that I had to get past it, and it's so far gone now, that it wasn't worth losing another family member, especially because I know that he doesn't have a whole lot of support in any other part of our family too. So not trying to at all demonize my father, even though he did the things he did.
I mean, I'm hearing a lot of compassion from what you're saying.
Yeah,
really.
And I think that's the way that you have to look at it, because in a lot of cases, I try to be an optimist, and I try to look at people as, they make mistakes, and a lot of them are pretty awful mistakes. But that doesn't mean that you can't still be open to them having a second chance.
Right.
But
And being able to give an
an
abuser a second chance, that's really tough.
Yeah, it is. Especially when it's somebody so close to you who's had such a big impact on your childhood by, doing those things.
Yeah.
But yeah, the real hero of the story, though, is definitely my mom, for having come out of that much stronger.
Yeah.
And, one thing I'll say is that growing up, we never got spanked or anything like that by either of my parents. And it was really interesting because I remember at that time when there was still abuse going on, even my dad would say to me, if I maybe like my sister and I got into a fight and maybe I'd like slap her on the arm or something, he'd be like, we don't ever hit you, so why should you hit her? And then at the same time, he was like hitting my mom. So it's kind of like it was a very confusing time.
Yeah.
But I'm very grateful to both my parents for having instilled that, violence isn't ever the answer, even though one of them wasn't always living that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just in what you were saying when you were talking about, struggles with forgiveness and stuff. I think there's this really interesting relationship between the idea of forgiving and the idea of forgetting. Mm. And I think it's so easy with forgiveness to feel like you have to forget in order to forgive.
Right.
And have to digress everything you've learned from that experience and everything you've taken from it and all the ways that it's hurt you or helped you grow and things like that. And finding the way, for my personal experience with forgiveness, is finding a way to separate forgetting from forgiving has been really important for me. And being like, what you did is still really real. So yeah, there's a history of abuse in my family, not domestic abuse. Was an outside abuser of one of my family members. And so growing up, that was always really hard to understand as a kid. Mm-hmm. And I know I still hold a lot, and I don't even know the person that did it at all, but I just still have a lot of resentment. Yeah. And it's really hard to, because you see as a witness of not the events, but the way that it's affected my whole family's life. Mm. You see so much pain brought from it. And it's really, really hard to, even after coming out the other side, as much as you can say a person can, not to say that it's all better. But even after coming out the other side, just looking back on the history of it and being like, but there was all that pain for all that time. It's really, really hard to find peace with that.
Yeah. And I feel like even when you forgive, like for me, in the times when it's been really hard to forgive someone or move past a situation, I can apologize and mean it, or forgive someone and mean it, really. But then it'll take another 6 months, a year, 2 years to actually really fully feel it. Like, even though you mean it in the moment, you can really forgive someone. For me, it takes a long time to fully work through that, even though you want to.
Yeah, that resentment still lingers.
Yeah, definitely. I'm curious, Spencer, how that, as a child, has affected how you see relationships and stuff now. Because I know for me, my parents divorced when I was 18 months old, and I'm very lucky in that it was a very amicable experience for my parents. They never bad talked each other to me or my sister or anything like that, which I'm really grateful for. But for the longest time, I didn't think that it had affected me at all. And then the older I've gotten, the more I'm like, oh wait, I have issues. And it's had an interesting effect on me and my sister. For me, like more like commitment and a fear about making wrong decisions in a relationship. And I think for my sister, like we both have unwavering loyalty and that kind of thing. But I don't know, it's affected us in different ways that it's taken us a long time to unpack. And divorce is very different than domestic violence. I want to be clear about that. So, but I'm curious about how your experience as a kid has affected how you've had relationships and how you see that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that it's made me come from a place of trying to be as gentle as possible in a way, because I know that when I witnessed that, there was a lot of anxiety, a lot of that kind of stuff. And actually, I've been getting a lot of anxiety this summer sort of out of nowhere that I haven't really experienced since I was that young. And I think it's just kind of come out of nowhere. But my relationships have been the thing that have sort of brought me back down to earth. And so whereas then my relationships were giving me anxiety, now they're the ones that are comforting me. And I think a big piece of that is that, you know, my girlfriend now, my close friends, my roommate, all my relationships with them are very amicable. They're very, you know, comfortable. I feel like I can say or do pretty much anything with any of them, which is really nice. But I also have really strived to be as gentle in all of my relationships as possible, especially with any girls, because I just never want to assume that position. You know, I never want to make people feel the way that I felt or that my mom felt,
right.
You know, or anything like that. And
I do think there can be some positive effects of, again, I'm just speaking from my experience, like knowing the sort of negative effects of divorce on kids. And even though my parents are wonderful people, divorce is hard on kids, like to just travel between parents. And so I know there's such an innate desire and staunch defense in me to never have that happen, like for my kids and stuff like that. So I think there are the positive effects that can come out of a bad situation or trauma or whatever it is to reinforce some really, really good values. So it's an interesting thing where negative experiences like that can kind of breed the two extremes of, like you said, your father was abused as a kid and then he grew up to be an abuser. So there's that negative extreme. But you also have the positive aspect of like really knowing what to do or what not to do, or what you believe in, what don't you believe in.
Yeah, and it's always interesting wondering, like, what thing in a person lets them take really negative experiences and turn them into strength and have them, like, become even more, instead of feeling like it's left them broken. And I think, I mean, part of that is, for a lot of people, the passage of time. You know, I think when there's trauma, there's going to be a time when you're broken, and that's totally okay. But what is it about a person that brings them out? And I was just thinking about your mom, and you said she came out of it stronger. Do you have any idea of, like, how she went about her struggle with it that was successful for her, that made her able to be the wonderful mother she was to you and is to you?
Well, one of the things is my mom is a straight badass, which is the first thing.
You know, I was about to say, I don't know your mom at all, but when I think of I don't know her very well, but when I think of your mom, I'm just like, she's a kick-ass person.
Yeah, she is. And
so
I think she was just built that way to you know, face those sorts of struggles and come out on top. But the other thing is, which goes back to me forgiving my dad too, is not having a support system and having the tools to reflect on those negative experiences makes all the difference. Because I know that my dad, when he had those negative experiences, he did not have any real sort of support system or outlet. And then he was also struggling with those mental illnesses and then not getting, you know, the medical help he needed, anything like that. So it was just a negative cocktail that led to it becoming a cycle. Whereas, you know, my mom and I coming out of those experiences, you know, we have a huge family who are all very loving and compassionate. So we always had a place to go to. I remember when we used to live in Pittsburgh at that time, when my parents were still together. And we ended up moving to Maryland, where Richard lives, or lived. at that time. And we actually were going to move to Kenya
What?
because my mom wanted to get out of the situation that we were in like so badly.
Kenya's
that
very out of the
she thought
situation.
she thought about just doing like missionary work over there
cool.
for the church. And so I remember, going on car rides and listening to Learn Swahili on tape and us like saying, different words in Swahili. And I was like, I'm never going to learn this language because I was so young trying to learn an African language. It was so
Hilarious.
different. So we were like prepared. We got passports. And then my mom was like, that's crazy. Let's not go to Kenya. However, we did go to Rome, which was my first time ever leaving the country. This was back in 2006. And I mean, that's one of those moments where, I'm so grateful for the, horrible events that led to that, because that really spurred, the travel bug in me. And now I've gone to like 16 countries outside of the U.S.
That's crazy.
Ever since then, because that was just an amazing experience. But yeah, so we went to Rome for a week, and then we ended up moving to Maryland, which is where a lot of our family is. So I think my mom really did everything right in that situation. She went where she had a support system, a family who was there for her, and where there was a community that was ready with open arms to take in her kids, my sister and I. We started going to that school, and then we had the church too. So, she just made the right move in terms of the change of scene and the change of attitude to get over it.
Yeah.
And at that time she was, I think, freelancing a lot more and stuff like that. She wasn't totally set in her career, but she was still like getting into it. And now she's kicking ass. So.
Yeah. Taking ass, taking names.
All of a
What does
sudden.
she do?
So it's hard to describe what she does, but she's worked mainly in like clinical trials her whole life, like clinical research, or like patient recruitment for clinical research. And now she works for a big consultancy company called Capgemini Invent. And they have like tons of clients all around the world. And she's actually been out of the country most of this summer, over in places like Germany and France and stuff like that.
Doing her
going
thing.
and meeting clients and closing deals.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
That is
it's
cool.
it's really cool.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like it's that idea of a support system is so essential, and it's really nice to hear that like the community that I grew up with was able to be like that support system for your mom, because when you grow up in like a small community, you always have like, at least I've always had like a lot of love, but also like a lot of baggage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because just the way a small community is, there's like, I love this about it and I don't like this about it. And so it's nice to hear, just for my own selfishness, to hear reinforced the things that I felt like were always really nice about growing up where we did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just to say it can be hard in a small community because you're super close to everyone and you feel super loved and everyone loves you, but you also don't want to like divulge everything to everyone because everyone knows everyone at the same time.
Right.
So a small community can be a hard mix of very supportive but also difficult to really divulge your baggage and that kind of thing.
And like I don't know how it was in Pittsburgh at the time, with the community, in talking with my mom, because I know when you experience those sorts of things, it can become a very like taboo matter where people start giving you like the side eye, like wondering how your situation is going. And I think that while we had a lot of great friends in Pittsburgh, it was probably better that we moved and sort of got out of the place where people just had that vision of our family in their minds, and we're sort of
preconceived
like, how do
notions.
we interact with them in certain ways? Not at all to disparage Pittsburgh. They were a great community too.
But it's, I mean, a fresh start is sometimes really needed for those kind of things.
Yeah, and it's as a support system, like from the eyes of the support system, a community that's trying to support someone going through any sort of trauma, but particularly domestic abuse, I think it can be hard to know how to behave. And I think that sort of that side eye that you were talking about is often like, oh man, I wonder how they're doing. I wonder if they need anything.
Yeah.
But as someone that is going through trauma or has a loved one going through trauma, I think it can often be like, I think about this all the time already.
Let's do something else.
Let's do something else.
Let's go bowling or something.
Yeah. Like just having a community that you can tell loves you and wants to interact with you. It's not about like, oh, let me take care of your needs around this. It's
exactly.
like, just let me know that there's a place that I can be normal and like
just giving
can
people
have
space to be. Period. You know.
And so I think that especially like really small and tightly knit communities can have like pretty bad busybody syndrome.
Yep.
Where they're like, oh man, we got to be doing stuff for them all the time because they're struggling right now, and it's from a really sweet place. And I guess we talked about this a little bit on our episode with our episode about suicide. That it's weird to know how to respond as a community, but I think so much just treating people like they're people, not like they're a trauma victim, is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to people needing support systems as well, and how to meet people where they are, and also head off things like behavior that might be leading down a bad path. And I think a lot of it comes back to people just caring for each other.
Right.
Like being able to have the presence of mind to reach out to someone who might be in a tough place. Because I think as a society, we're kind of charged to treat the problems that have already happened, whether it's in abuse or with drugs or mental illness. Like we're good at treating it once we already see it, but we're not good at heading off things like that and being able to help people fix problems before they come to a violent conclusion or an abusive conclusion. And I think, there are several reasons why that is, but I think it would help if we could kind of empower compassion in people. I don't know if there's a way to systematize that, but I don't know. I just see that a lot, and it makes me sad that we're better at treating problems once they already happen than giving people a safe place before they happen. You know,
a big issue with healthcare in the U.S., not to get too off track, is we treat symptoms before we treat the root of problems.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big place where spirituality and that sort of thing comes in, because spirituality, religion, different sorts of therapy, they get at the root of the issues, the emotional trauma that's been lingering in the back of your mind that's causing physical symptoms or things like that. And
For sure.
I don't think there's enough of that. You can see it with things like the opioid crisis in the U.S. There's so much just, let's take the headache away and not treat, what's causing the headache.
Yeah. Slap a Band-Aid on it.
Yeah, and I think it's that way with, domestic violence too, because domestic violence realistically is a symptom of, the way that it happens to both men and women, but especially the way that men are raised, still today. Things are getting, a lot more open, a lot more acceptable. I know you guys did like a toxic masculinity episode, right? Yeah, so like things like that, we definitely need to take more into account about the way that our sons and daughters are being raised, what sorts of role models that they have. Yeah. Their interactions on social media, all that kind of stuff. And that's why I think that with domestic abuse, if you're just saying that you can't ever forgive somebody who's been a perpetrator, or you don't want to talk about it because just too, there's never a good time to talk about it or something like that. Those are not ways of going about fixing the real issue here. One, it needs to always be talked about. It needs to become, completely normalized so that we know how often this happens, because it happens a lot. I wanted to give you guys a couple of statistics that are from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I'll talk a little bit more about them because I want to talk about my senior project at some point.
Oh, cool.
Because it was in support of them. But
Yeah.
I just want to give like their definition of domestic violence because while it seems really obvious what it is, I think actually defining it can really help in pointing things out because sometimes people are being abused in certain ways and they don't even realize it, and that's actually. I
also
a big
think we can
issue.
be abusers without even knowing it in
and be
like
abusers.
low-key ways.
So they say that domestic violence is the willful intimidation, physical assault, battery, sexual assault, and or other abusive behavior as part of a systematic pattern of power and control perpetrated by one intimate partner against another. So I think that systematic pattern of power and control is really key there. And that's one of the biggest things when it comes to things like toxic masculinity, and other, especially like gender-related issues, is having that like pattern of control. Is one partner sort of dominating over the other?
Right.
A lot of people, I think, sort of struggle to find that balance in relationships, and it can lead to abuse very easily.
Yeah. Well, and I think people often see domestic violence as purely physical, just like someone hitting someone or beating someone, but that definition, what caught me was the first part of it, which was willful manipulation, or willful intimidation. I think it was
willful intimidation,
and that's like such a gray area, which I think is really, really good to look out for because we can be doing that in such small ways and not even knowing it, or having it done to us and not really know it, and it's easy for us to gloss over manipulation or intimidation. I mean, just saying, no, it's fine. It's not domestic abuse.
It could even be something like, I want to go to this movie with, my girlfriends today, and the other person being like, oh, I'd rather you not do that, to the point that they're like, okay, well, I guess I won't go if it'll upset you.
Yeah,
things like that.
Pattern of behaviors having that cycle so that they don't even ask in the first place.
It's the lack of freedom that is a really big thing. Yeah. One of the other stats that I wanted to point out, just to show how common this is that this is actually about stalking. 1 in 7 women and 1 in 18 men have been stalked. And stalking is a tactic to instill a target to fear that they or someone close to them will be harmed or killed. And stalking may seem a little bit more extreme than partner-to-partner violence, but it's one of those things that also is a big warning sign about potential partners, because a lot of times people may do things like stalking before they then approach a potentially romantic partner. And so that's like one big thing that we need to talk about a lot too, is it's not always just like people who are dating or married. It's people who have not even met yet, are already showing signs that abuse might happen. And so you have to acknowledge those sorts of things to then prevent it from happening.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't want to make an equivalency with like school shootings or anything like that, but I think we see a pattern where people who act out in violent or manipulative ways haven't had the opportunity or haven't sought care or treatment or realized that there are issues, or had their parents realize there are issues with their kids or something like that. And it gets back to the whole, like, as a society, we're good about slapping a societal Band-Aid on something, but not good at meeting the problem before it becomes a problem.
Right.
Yeah. And what you were saying earlier about like the way we raise our children, I feel like is so important. And Sonia, my wife, love saying my wife, she has a couple of times said something that stuck with me, and just I felt like it's a really wise statement, where she said, like, culturally, men are raised to be as big as possible and women are raised to be as small as possible. Mm-hmm. And I think that has really negative effects on both genders. I think men are raised to, it's good to be big and strong, but it's also good to be loud and in charge.
Right.
And I think that cocktail, when it goes wrong, can easily lead to violence. Mm-hmm. And this idea of like, I'm the man, so I need to be in charge of this. I need to be like the one leading this. I need to be like the big player on the stage.
In control.
Yeah. And I think
issues. –
male on female domestic violence, it becomes really toxic if a woman is also kind of accepted the bad cocktail of like, I need to be small, I need to be non-confrontational, I need to be submissive. And so although not to at all say less of female on male domestic violence, because that definitely happens too.
Still a real issue.
And there's a lot of sort of different emotional trauma that can go into that because of that stereotype. But I think we see male on female domestic violence is much more common.
Yeah.
Often because of this sort of cultural attitude about men needing to be big and women needing to be small. And
I mean, the optimist in me does think that like the 21st century is the first time we've really started to push back on the sort of gender stereotypes that we're subconsciously raising people with. And I think that's a really good thing to be like, no, guys, it's okay to cry.
Yeah.
That's great, man. Go for it. We're proud of you for being able to express yourself emotionally. And I know, like, I repressed some of those things as a kid and, like, am in a great place now and have been for a long time, which is awesome. But I like that tendency. There's even the sort of meme of boomers not being able to tell their kids that I love them, and Gen Xers are like, well, we can do that.
Yeah.
May not have a 401k, but we can tell our kids we love them. And I think that is going to have a very positive family trend, which is exciting. And stable families are just so important, like culturally, societally, economically, for countries as a whole. Like, it's so important. And my hope is that we move to a place where we are supporting that in very real ways, because that's going to have so many positive ramifications on everything.
Yeah.
Because that's where literally everything starts, is in the household. So if you can secure that as a safe place, a warm place where people are free to express themselves and to grow and not hidden away or hurt, that just breeds such a good culture. The optimist in me thinks that we're coming to a place where that is more readily accessible. And it's good that we can talk about these things and digest them with people, because I don't think we were able to do that 20 years ago, even.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I am most grateful to my parents for was probably both of my parents multiple times a day would say I love you to me, and it just always was very clear that like that was a real bond between us, and it was okay to express love to people.
Yeah, my dad always had a thing where he would kind of look at me and go, Luke, I love you. It was really cute. And it was nice, because I was never afraid of my dad, and he was always such an emotionally present man, and I was very thankful for that. Both of my parents were. So being able to express that is really, really useful. So before you had said that spirituality kind of is the place to head those sort of tendencies off and heal before even you need healing, that kind of thing. So I'm wondering if you've had conversations with your mom about how that played a role for her and for you, kind of growing up in a spiritual community or being raised religiously.
Right. Maybe not any specific conversations, but I do know that my mom she's always been like a helper. She loves going out of her way to, show up for somebody who needs her. And so when she found New Church Live, which is, a church here that's really focused on going out and doing service work and that kind of stuff, she absolutely fell in love with it. And so she goes to church as much as she can when she's home, and she always goes to participate in the different, service projects that they go do, down in like Philadelphia and things like that. And I think that having the community that she did getting out of her own situation was nice, but then being able to sort of take it a step further and then help other people who are then going through those struggles, I think helped her get through her own struggles too, right. Which it's interesting because you don't think that helping somebody else will inherently help yourself, but
it always does.
It always does, because I think, one, it brings you much closer to all the people around you, and it makes you realize, the similar struggles that everybody goes through. And you think if you can help somebody else get through something, you can see genuine progress that they're making, why can't you make progress too? So I think that she, looked for things like that, opportunities to get out there and help other people too. And I know that's something that I've done as well, which I guess is a pretty good transition into talking about my senior project.
Yeah.
So when I was a senior in high school at the Academy of the New Church, I was in a class called Senior Project. And basically you have the entire school year to develop some sort of project related to whatever interest area you want. But usually there's a big focus on the service aspect of it. And so what I wanted to do was develop a sort of social media campaign for like awareness about domestic violence. And I made this whole campaign online called RIPDV, which is like Rest in Peace Domestic Violence, or Rest in Pieces if you'd rather that. And basically what I was doing is just asking the community and everyone outside the community to give their voice and talk about how these are things that have been experienced by them or by people they know, or by anyone.
Yeah.
And
share and heal.
Yeah, to share and heal. And I made this awareness video where I sort of told a very brief version of my story that I told you guys earlier, which with much less detail. And I posted it online, hoping to get a bunch of shares. My page on Facebook actually ended up getting it's still alive. Actually, it has around 500 likes, and I did that just in a few months during my senior year, which was really nice. But one thing that was sort of a conundrum was when I was pushing out that video, I wanted to show the video at school during a post-chapel morning announcement, because we still had chapel in high school at that time. And the administration decided that they didn't want the video to be shown during a mandatory period because you have to sit through announcements. And because it was a sensitive topic, they didn't want anybody who might be negatively affected by seeing it to be forced to watch it, basically, which I understood. And, I respect that they made that decision. However, I definitely disagreed at the time, and I still disagree, because I think that when it comes to domestic violence, there's never, ever a good time to talk about it. Or I guess there's always a good time to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because it is such a sensitive topic, and so many people have had experiences with it, that, it's just something that you have to put out there into the universe. You can't just keep it inside because it will eat away at you, which is why it's why I've tried to tell my story. And I know my mom's been pretty open with her story as well. And so actually a bunch of teachers I know ended up showing the video in some of their classes.
That's cool.
Just to sort of get it out there to the students because they felt it was important, which I really appreciated that support.
It's nice support.
But I think it's important. I'm not at all, disparaging, their decision. I totally understood why they made that decision. But I think that, when it comes to schools handling these sorts of topics with kids of any age, it is tough, but it's something that I think that, all kids really need to hear about, because I'm sure you could look at any school and I'm sure there's a decent percentage of the population of those kids that are, have experienced something similar. And a lot of times, you don't think about it, but especially at young ages, you don't realize how many other people have experienced those sorts of things. I thought, when I was young going through it, that none of my friends had any idea, like, those sorts of things. And it made you feel very lonely and very scared because you didn't know how to get it out there. You didn't want to talk about it because you felt embarrassed.
Right.
But I think if you're, explaining this to kids at, decently young ages, they'll at least see that if they ever do experience something like this, they're not alone, which is like the biggest thing, going back to the support system. So my senior project, though, it was pretty successful. It was nice seeing the amount of support that I did get from the community as a whole, and from people outside the community. I've been thinking about going back on there and maybe like revitalizing the page again.
That's cool.
But it's just not something I've been able to keep up with since high school.
Well, I don't know if Ben told you, but right now, for our job here, I'm making a video, and Ben and I both shot it, about domestic violence and from an interfaith standpoint. And so what we did is we interviewed like 6 different people from different faith backgrounds. We got a Jewish person, a Muslim person, a Hindu person, a Presbyterian, New Church, all these different people to say the same script about standing out against domestic violence within their own faith backgrounds, within their own religion, and then giving a little interview to say their piece of how it's impacted them and how they want their congregation to see their church as a safe place for these sorts of things. And it's been a really cool video to work on.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I think really powerful because, it's just nice to know that your church is a safe haven for you, that kind of thing. So that's been empowering. And I think what you were saying about school plays into that as well, because if people aren't being supported or educated in a well-rounded way at home, like we were saying earlier, school is the next place and church is the next place for that real conversation to take place, for that education to take place. And, not every kid is going to get that kind of support or holistic experience at home. So bringing that to schools is really powerful because that's a place where these kids, these students can have a place to share with other people who might be going through the same thing, who they might not know otherwise, which is incredibly powerful. And then the same with church, being able to take this place of community that is usually seen in one certain circumstance, like, oh, we're here to get instruction from God, or we are here to get instruction from our teachers. But no, this is a community, a place to be your whole person and experience things with other people and learn in that kind of way. I think it's really important. So I think it's cool that you try to bring that to school, especially a religious school.
Yep.
I think it's important.
Thanks. Yeah, and it also goes back to role models too, because teachers are such big role models, especially to younger kids. And if you don't have those strong role models at home, with your parents who are going through things like that, especially on the father side, having like a strong male teacher is really nice when they are sort of embodying what the true dad should be versus
fill that dad role.
The dad at home. And I know that I had a lot of great teachers growing up too that sort of filled in. I'm also pretty lucky too because I have a great stepdad now, who my mom met actually just before we went on that Rome trip that I mentioned earlier. I remember when we were in Rome, she was hopping into internet cafes. This was like 2006. So,
we're old now. Maybe.
Yeah. This was 2006. And she was sending sappy love emails to this new flame. And my sister and I were absolutely disgusted. But he ended up being a really, really awesome
That's
dad.
Cool.
So
did you have fear around that, like with your mom finding someone new?
I think I actually had the opposite of fear. I think I was very encouraged because I thought she couldn't possibly get another one like that.
That's super
figured,
optimistic. I love it.
Yeah, I figured it could only be for the best. And when my mom was like a single mom, she sacrificed the world for my sister and I. But I just knew that she really needed that other person to help her find that balance and have that support. And so when my stepdad Charles, came into the picture, while I was a little wary at first, I could tell right away how different he was. And yeah, it's been great.
That's great.
How long have they been together now?
They got married in 2011, so about 8 years. Yeah, February 2011, I think.
Wow.
Yeah. And
cool.
Now I have a younger sister for it too, Vivian, who's 7, and she was born a year after they got married. And so I'm very lucky that not only did I get an awesome stepdad, but I got another little sister out of it too. So like I said, everything happens for a reason, or at least that's what I believe. And I think that, the struggles that my mom went through were really just to eventually lead her down the path to finding him and to having, another daughter and being as successful as she is now.
That's kind of how I feel too. Like my parents both divorced and remarried. And so there's always a part of me that wonders what my life would be like if they had stayed together and like made it work, or if how that situation would have played out. But then I look at my life how it is, and I have 2 awesome stepbrothers, 2 awesome half-brothers on my different sides, and all these big combinations of families that meet up. And I wouldn't trade that for the world. You know,
Yeah.
I love it. I love the relationships I have with them. So looking at those great things that can come out of a sort of sad event, and I wouldn't want to change it.
Yeah.
You know, how could I?
And you know, like I always think, oh, maybe if my parents had just never been together, but then I wouldn't.
But then
have
you wouldn't be
existed.
there, exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, like I said, everything I think happens for a reason there, because if my mom hadn't gone through what she had gone through, then I wouldn't be here today. So, and I think she would say that she would go through that all again if it meant having both my sister and I.
Wow.
You know,
That's powerful.
as tough as it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, this reminds me of a really cool, one of my favorite New Church quotes, that is like, God doesn't allow anything bad to happen that good can't be brought out of.
Mm-hmm.
And so in any negative situation, there is always good to be found somewhere.
Yeah.
And that can be harder depending on the situation, but there's always ways to see even the worst situations as growth, or as, I mean, you see so often like the most active advocates for change are people that have suffered, people that have had trauma around the subject that they're an advocate for.
Right.
And I mean, you yourself and your
living
senior
example
project
here.
and stuff like that. And it's so inspiring to see someone have those struggles, be motivated to address that problem and move culture forward and move community forward in how we handle things.
Right.
And it's really inspiring to see the good, the immense, widespread good that can come from a really sad situation that a single person was strong enough to make it through.
Right.
So I'd love to go back to our conversation that we started having way back at the beginning of this about sort of the situation of the victim, the witness, and the perpetrator. And we talked a lot about the victim in your personal example, and how big community was for her, and a structure of support. And I guess you talked about that being really important for you too.
Yeah.
So in your experience, what advice would you give about if you are struggling with being a perpetrator, or thinking about perpetrating, or worried for yourself, or have done it and want to stop? Like, what would you say the steps to change, the steps to healing are for that?
I think the first thing is obviously like recognizing the issue, and if you can recognize that you have recognized the issue, that's a really big start, because a lot of people do it without ever realizing what they are doing. And so if you can see that you've made some mistakes and are starting to sort of go down a darker path, just being able to know that for yourself and then speak it to somebody, maybe your partner who you may have been, like abusing in any way, or saying that you want to change. You have to want to be able to change.
Yeah.
And then it's seeking out that outside help, looking to see what solutions would work for you. I know in dealing with things like depression and anxiety in my life, I've recently done a lot of meditating, things like that, just being more mindful. And I know that has helped me become very introspective and sort of start to recognize different problems in my life that have sprung up just from my own issues. And so I think, having practices like that allow you to stop, take a break from the craziness of the world, and just look at, where you are, what is going on in your life. That's really important to be able to take that pause. And
I love that culture is realizing more and more and destigmatizing more and more the benefits of therapy as well.
Yeah.
I think even just like when I was growing up, it felt like therapy was the thing that people that needed help went to.
Or just a sign of weakness.
Yeah. And I went to therapy as a kid and unfortunately just didn't have good experiences with therapy and didn't continue to try to seek it out. But I realize now, like, I think any person, no matter what they're going through in life, can benefit from therapy.
Yeah.
Especially just from finding a therapist that works with you and kind of you can really do good work on, because there is just work that becomes much easier if you have someone guiding you through it.
Yeah.
And so those practices of mindfulness, whether it's meditation or therapy or just talking to a friend, I feel like are really important for basically any emotional issue you're going through.
Yeah, I see that as like the voice step of it. And I think I want to even encourage people, I don't know, because you do have to recognize that it's a problem first, with whatever the case may be, whether it's physical abuse or emotional abuse, mental, spiritual, whatever, and then want to change. But I think we can do ourselves a disservice by thinking it might be an issue and then convincing ourselves that it's not an issue and then not speaking up about it. So I think it's really important, because we are social and spiritual creatures, to voice your fears that even it might be a problem, even if you don't know if it is yet, or you don't know it might be a factor. That we talked about that support system being really useful and necessary. And so finding someone who you intimately trust and just being like, hey, I'm afraid that I'm being a bad partner to someone I love, whether it's a friend or a romantic partner, or I'm afraid I'm manipulating them. I'm worried that I'm doing that in small ways, because it's easy to see in big ways if you lay a hand on someone, but it's hard to see in those small ways. So I think it takes a lot of courage to push through that fear of voicing really hard things for yourself. So I guess I would encourage, someone who thinks or even has an inkling that they might be doing something abusive to voice that to someone they trust, to be able to work through it. Because I just, for myself, like, I can get really caught up in my own thoughts and thinking that I can deal with it all. I can fix it myself. I don't need someone else to help me. And maybe it comes back to that being a man and being strong and big and not needing help.
Yeah.
But I think it's just like a me personal thing, just my personality. So pushing through that fear of judgment or showing vulnerability and being able to voice it. So important.
I think it's incredible in a bad way how much the human mind can rationalize away anything. And I'm sure there are, in any sort of abuse relationship, people who are even physically abusive that rationalize it away as not a bad thing, because it's the human mind is incredibly powerful in what it can convince itself of. And so it's just, I think when you keep it just in yourself, you can basically make it anything it needs to be comfortable. And so even when you have clearly stepped over the line and are clearly an abuser, if you're just keeping that inside yourself, whatever rationalization you're going to make can suddenly be the truth to you, because there's no solid outside source for it to run into, for it to bounce off of, to be a foil for you. So that speaking out, I think, is really, really important.
Having friends who know you is really important, because if they really have gotten to like the core of who you are as a person and like they're very close with you, they can see when you are doing things that are, one, outside of your norm, or two, outside of the societal norm. So if you're taking steps towards abuse at all, they're probably going to see it if they spend a lot of time around you and your partner or things like that. Right. But I think if you are recognizing that in yourself and then you go to them and say like, hey, like I've been struggling with some of these things, they're going to know if they've noticed that, and then they'll hopefully then tell you. And just having that as at least a first resource, those friends. And to all the friends out there who are, they may be seeing some of this happening with their friends, don't be afraid to speak up and, pull them aside and talk to them, because sometimes, they just haven't realized what they're doing, and they need a friend to sort of put them in their place.
Yeah. And even if in that conversation it doesn't lead directly to something, or that person brushes it off and says, "Oh no, that's not happening."
Yeah.
Like, you still did a good thing, and you never know where that conversation is going to go in that person's brain. Yeah. And that might lead to some growth or some change down the road.
And even if you're totally mistaken and just misread the interaction,
better to have done it. It's
better for them to be like, "Oh, I don't think that's what's happening," and for you to be like, "Oh man, maybe I misread it. Yeah. My bad." And if you are friends that really care about each other, hopefully you can see that you're looking out for them and for their relationship.
I think just overwhelmingly, it's just silence is not the answer.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's not going to help the situation. Man, this has been a great conversation. I feel like I'm almost emotionally drained in a good way,
Yeah, thanks again so much for coming on and sharing your story. It's always really powerful to hear people speak out and to talk about not just that it happened, but what has come from it, the good and the bad, and what people can take from it, and how people can learn to move past or move with.
And you're such a cool example of the good that can come out of something like that. And to see you be a force for that is really empowering for me personally, and hopefully for people listening and or watching to this. So,
yeah. Well, I'm glad that you guys are doing a series like this where you can have people on and talk about these kinds of topics, because not enough people are. And with podcasts, I've been listening to a lot myself, and they just stimulate so much more thought within you than like if you're just hanging out at home, you throw on a podcast and then you're thinking about these huge topics, and then it comes into your conversations with your friends, and then they bring it to their friends, and it's sort of this big ripple effect. So I think just being the first person to start talking about it is a big deal. So I'm glad that you guys brought me on to do this.
Thank you. That's nice. Any closing thoughts you have to anyone, or any plugs for yourself or anything like that?
No plugs, but I will just say, if you guys are out there and you are struggling, there are always resources to help you guys. Talk to your friends, talk to your parents, talk to counselors at school. Just talk to somebody, speak it out into the universe, because once you get it out there, it can then be analyzed and hopefully eventually fixed. Yeah. So
silence is not the answer. So thank you guys so much for listening and or watching to the Spiritable podcast. Remember to find us on all the social media things. Instagram's where it's at mostly. We don't do anything on Twitter.
What's our name on Instagram? Hit me with it.
What is it? Just Spiritable, right?
Nah, Grand Human Project.
Oh yeah, Grand Human Project on all our social media. Bam, hit us up. Twitter's not that great, but Instagram is where it's at. Grand Human Project. Follow us on Facebook. And subscribe to us on YouTube, or download our podcast wherever you find podcasts, on Apple or Spotify or Stitcher, or anywhere, really. And if you have any questions, feel free to email us at
spiritablepodcast@gmail.com.
This guy, look, such a professional.
You really put me on the spot there. I almost forgot it.
I saw it in your eye.
I was like, oh no, do I still remember? And if you have any comments or questions, you can, like we said, email us or post a comment under the YouTube video.
We're trying to pump up those YouTube comments, so hit those
We'd love to hear from you guys and respond. And
if you have any suggestions on topics for the future, we'd love to hear those as well. So thank you guys for being here with us in this kind of vulnerable space, and we'll see you next time.